A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Communications. I am absolutely thrilled to spend some time with you today because we are continuing our Trust series with a topic that I believe sits right at the center of modern marketing, leadership, and business growth. One of the biggest shifts I see happening right now is that we are moving from what I call a promise economy to an evidence economy. For decades, brands could build trust through carefully crafted messaging, strong positioning, and compelling promises. Today, buyers increasingly respond to those promises with a simple question: can you prove it? And that question changes everything. Let me be clear. I am not arguing that branding is dead. I am not arguing that positioning no longer matters. And I'm certainly not arguing that organizations should stop making promises. In fact, I would argue the opposite. Strong positioning is still one of the most important strategic assets a company can possess. A compelling promise still creates differentiation. A clear message still creates direction, but something fundamental has changed. You know the language: customer first, trusted partner, innovative, people-centered, industry-leading. We've all heard those phrases. We've all written those phrases. We've all probably approved those phrases. The difference is that today's buyers are no longer satisfied with the promise alone. They want evidence. They want validation. They want proof that what a company says is reflected in what a company actually does. Because trust is no longer created simply through what we say, trust increasingly depends on what people experience. It depends on what they observe. It depends on what they hear from others. It depends on belief. And ultimately, it depends on whether human behavior reinforces the promise that marketing created in the first place. So today I want to roll up our sleeves and explore what changed, why trust has become more behavioral, and what organizations need to do if they want their brand promises to survive in today's marketplace. Let's dive in. The trust recession. I think one of the most important realities marketers need to acknowledge is that we are operating in what many people would describe as a trust recession. Trust has become harder to earn, in many cases, easier to lose. Why? Well, there just isn't one reason. There are several forces converging at the same time. Let's start with AI-generated content. We are now surrounded by content. Every platform, every channel, every device, every day. The volume is staggering. And while AI is an incredible tool, and I'm a huge advocate for using AI to increase efficiency and accelerate insights, it has also created a new challenge. People are consuming more content than ever while trusting less of it. Buyers know that content can be generated quickly. They know messaging can be manufactured. They know websites can be polished. They know thought leadership can be outsourced. As a result, audiences have become more skeptical. Then layer on economic uncertainty. When budgets tighten, risk tolerance drops. When risk tolerance drops, buyers become more cautious. And when buyers become more cautious, trust becomes more important than ever. People scrutinize decisions more carefully. They seek validation. They look for evidence. They want reassurance. Another factor is performative branding. We've all seen organizations make bold declarations about values, culture, purpose, or customer commitment. But when actions fail to align with those declarations, credibility suffers. And thanks to social media and digital transparency, those inconsistencies become visible very quickly. We also live in a world where company behavior is easier to observe than ever before. Employees share experiences, customers leave reviews, communities talk. Leadership decisions become public, internal culture becomes external information, and suddenly the gap between what a company says and what a company does becomes visible. That's why one of the most important insights in today's environment is this. Buyers no longer trust declared identity alone. They trust observable behavior. That is a massive shift because for years, marketing teams focused heavily on perception management. Today, trust is increasingly shaped by experience management. And those are not the same thing. Now let's talk about what I believe is at the strategic center of the entire conversation. The real problem is not that brand promises no longer matter. The real problem is what I call the implementation gap. The implementation gap is the distance between what a brand says and what people actually experience. And here's the important part. Brand promises still matter tremendously. They create direction, they establish expectations, they support positioning, they create emotional alignment, and give customers a reason to care. Without a clear promise, organizations drift into the sea of sameness. And listeners, you know how passionate I am about positioning. Positioning remains one of the most important strategic levers available to any organization. The problem isn't the promise. The problem is what happens after the promise. Because marketing establishes the expectation, human behavior determines whether the promise survives. Think about that for a moment. A company can spend millions creating a compelling message, but what happens if customer experience doesn't reinforce it? What happens if leadership behavior contradicts it? What happens if employees don't believe it? What happens if the buying experience feels completely disconnected from the positioning? The promise starts to crack then, and eventually trust erodes. This is why trust is no longer solely a marketing responsibility. It's an organizational responsibility. Leadership influences trust, operations influence trust, customer experience influence trust, employees influence trust, communications influences trust. Every touch point either reinforces the promise or weakens it. And that's why organizations that treat branding as a campaign often struggle. The organizations that win understand that branding is a system. It's not just what appears in the advertising. It's what happens throughout the customer journey. Every interaction becomes evidence. Every experience becomes proof. Every employee becomes a brand representative, whether they realize it or not. And increasingly, buyers are paying attention. Let's explore how buyer behavior itself has changed. Historically, many organizations operated with a relatively straightforward model. Promise, awareness, purchase. You created the awareness. You created communicated value. Customers made a decision. The path was relatively linear. Today, that model looks very, very different. Now, it often looks like this. Promise, verification, trust, advocacy, purchase. Notice what happened? Verification entered the process, and a lot of times up on top. Before people trust, they investigate. Before they commit, they validate. Before they believe, they verify. Modern buyers are conducting what I often describe as a silent risk audit. Nobody announces they're doing it, but they're doing it constantly. They're asking questions like this. Does leadership behavior match the message? Does the customer experience reinforce positioning? Do employees sound authentic? Do reviews support the claims? Does the company disappear after the sale? Is the culture aligned with the marketing? These questions are happening beneath the surface, and the answers determine trust. What buyers trust today is often remarkably practical. Consistency, responsiveness, expertise, transparency, peer validation, lived experience. Notice that none of those things are taglines. None of them are slogans. None of them are campaign concepts. They are behavioral signals. And because they are behavioral signals, they are difficult to fake over long periods of time. That's actually good news for all of us because while trust may be harder to earn today, it is more durable when earned honestly. Organizations that consistently deliver positive experiences create trust assets that competitors cannot easily replicate. Why? Because those assets are built through behavior, not messaging alone. The reason we've spent so much time talking about this is because trust is no longer just a marketing issue. It's an organizational issue. And honestly, I think that's where a lot of companies get into trouble. They assume trust can be created through messaging when trust is actually reinforced or broken through experience. That's why trust can't be treated as a communications exercise alone. It has to be intentionally designed into a way an organization operates. At Avocet, we've spent a lot of time studying this challenge because we kept seeing the same pattern emerge over and over and over again. Companies would invest heavily in messaging, positioning, and awareness, but the customer experience wasn't always aligned with the promise. That's what eventually led us to develop something we call the trust architecture. Now, I don't want to turn this episode into a framework discussion, but I do think there are a few ideas worth sharing because they reinforce what we're talking about today. One area that we focus on is what we call trust foundations. These are relationship-building elements that help trust take root. They help create belief. Things like familiarity, consistency, emotional accessibility, transparency, community connection. When people feel familiar with an organization, trust grows easily. When experiences are consistent, trust deepens. When companies are transparent, trust becomes more resilient. Then there are trust systems. This is an operational layer. Customer experience, responsiveness, leadership alignment, employee behavior, service consistency. These systems determine whether trust survives, because even the strongest relationship can be damaged when trust systems fail repeatedly. Finally, there's trust validation. How people verify what they believe. Reviews, peer perception, community conversations, direct experience referrals, social proof. You've heard it all. This is where audiences answer the question, is the promise actually true? And here's the key insight. Trust is no longer sustained through declarations alone. It has to survive human interaction. That is where trust either strengthens or breaks. Not in the campaign, not in the tagline, not in the annual report. In the everyday moment where people interact with the organization, that's where trust becomes real. Let me share a practical example. Years ago, we had the opportunity to work with the national brand Big O Tires. Now, Big O had a strong national promise. Many of you may remember it. It's called the Team You Trust. Although we don't love using the word trust in positioning statements because of the industry and the feedback we got through many voice of customer insights and surveys, trust actually needed to be something declarative in the industry, and we capitalized on that with the national brand agency. It's a powerful positioning statement, but here's what made it meaningful. It wasn't just words. It was what happened locally. Think about the tire industry for a moment. Almost every tire brand talks about trust, safety, service, expertise, reliability. Those messages tend to sound very familiar. So if every competitor is making similar promises, what becomes the deciding factor? The deciding factor becomes human experience. Why do I trust this location with my family? Why do I trust these people with my vehicle? Why do I come back year after year after year? Those answers are rarely found in advertising alone. They're found in relationships, community familiarity, repeated positive experiences, consistent service, recognizable faces, trust built over time. One element of the Big O strategy involved Little O, a brand character that we developed. And yes, Little O helped create familiarity. It helped create accessibility. It helped make the brand feel more approachable. But here's the important point. Little O was not the trust builder. Human interaction was the trust builder. The mascot helped create recognition. The people created belief. And that's a distinction many marketers miss. Trust often grows through repeated positive familiarity and consistent experience, not simply through large-scale campaigns. That's what makes the team you trust more meaningful. The promise was reinforced by local human relationships. The brand promise wasn't standing alone. It was being supported by evidence. Every positive customer interaction became proof. Every repeat visit became proof. Every community relationship became proof. And when enough proof accumulate, trust becomes incredibly powerful. So where does this leave us today? What should leaders and marketers take away from all of this? I think the biggest lesson is surprisingly simple. The brands winning today are not abandoning brand promises. They're operationalizing them. They're making sure promises show up in customer experience. They're making sure they show up in leadership behavior. They're making sure promises show up in employee interactions. They're making sure promises show up in operations, because brand is increasingly defined by experience rather than messaging. And all of that requires alignment. Alignment between marketing and leadership, alignment between leadership and operations, and alignment between customer experience and positioning, alignment between employee behavior and brand values, alignment between community presence and organizational purpose. When that alignment exists, trust compounds. When it doesn't, trust erodes. And here's why that matters so much. Trust is becoming one of the most important competitive advantages available to organizations today. Products can be copied, features can be copied, technology can be copied, campaigns can be copied. Trust is much harder to copy because trust is built through thousands of interactions over time. It's accumulated, it's earned, and it's reinforced through behavior. That's why the future of branding isn't bigger promises, it's stronger alignment. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. The death of unsupported brand promises is not the death of branding. It is the return of accountability. And honestly, I think that's a good thing because the question buyers are asking isn't going away. Whether they're evaluating a company, a product, a service provider, or a potential partner, they're still asking the same question. Can you prove it? Not through polished messaging alone, not through clever campaigns alone, not through carefully crafted positioning statements alone, but through consistent delivery, through authentic leadership, through operational excellence, through meaningful customer experiences, and through human behavior that reinforces what the brand says it stands for. The organizations that deserve trust will earn trust. And the brands that win over the next decade won't simply make stronger promises. They'll build organizations capable of consistently delivering on those promises. Because when trust is reinforced through experience, it becomes more than a marketing outcome. It becomes a business asset. Thank you so much for joining me today on StrategyCast. I absolutely love exploring these meaty topics with all of you because they challenge us to become better marketers, better leaders, and better stewards of the brands we serve. If today's episode sparked an idea, challenged an assumption, or gave you something worth discussing with your team, I'd love to hear about it. You can always reach me at Lori@StrategyCast.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, Lori Sartorius-Jones. Please don't forget to subscribe to the StrategyCast newsletter as well, where we continue these conversations and share additional insights that help you grow. Until next time, keep asking better questions, stay relentlessly curious, and remember, trust isn't built by what you promise. Trust is built by what you repeatedly prove. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you on the next episode.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.